Started. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being here with us today, and welcome everyone. My name is Carolyn, and I am the events manager here at Tricycle. And we're so honored to be here today with Andrew Olendzki, who's been working with Tricycle for many years, and is here to teach us a bit today about the Eightfold Path and about the practice of sutta study. So welcome, Andrew. Thank you for being here. Today's Zoom session will be recorded for anyone who's unable to attend live, and we'll make it available on Tricycle's YouTube channel. The link is posted in the chat in case you want to share it with friends who can't be here, or if you'd like to watch it again. We're providing this event for free, so if you haven't already and would like to support Tricycle, please consider giving at the donation link in the chat. We'll also put a link in the chat for Andrew's Tricycle online course Dhamma Wheel, which is a full year-long program of daily contemplative study delivered via email. So we're offering a special promotion today for everyone who's attending the workshop. You can use the code Eightfold Path with the number 8 to get your first month of Dhamma Wheel free, and the cost is $9.99 every month thereafter. We'll leave time for a short Q&A at the end of this hour-long session. Feel free to leave a question in the chat box or a Q&A tab at any time at the bottom of the screen. So I'll introduce today's guest speaker, Andrew Olendzki. Andrew is a professor at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and director of its mindfulness studies program. He's a scholar of early Buddhist thought and practice with a special interest in Buddhist psychology and its relevance to the modern world. Prior to joining Lesley, he worked for almost 30 years in Barre, Massachusetts, first as the original executive director of the Insight Meditation Society, and then as executive director and senior scholar at the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies, where his focus was on the integration of academic study with the practice of meditation. During this time, he also held recurring adjunct faculty positions at colleges including Amherst, Brandeis, Harvard, Smith, and Lesley. Andrew was a senior scholar at the Mind and Life Institute, contributing to their Mapping the Mind project, and has been a longtime board member of the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. He writes regularly for Tricycle and is the author of Unlimiting Mind, The Radically Experiential Psychology of Buddhism, and Untangling Self, a Buddhist investigation of who we really are. So thank you so much for being here, Andrew, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that introduction, and welcome to you all, and thank you for coming. So I'm going to speak today a little bit about the Eightfold Path as a model for Buddhist exploration and practice, and more specifically about this sort of system that I've invented for how to study that in a very systematic way. So first of all, just a few words about the wheel as an image in Buddhist tradition. The wheel is, probably you all know, is one of the primary emblems of Buddhism. And it goes back to the tradition that when the Buddhist began teaching, the first time he gave a sermon, the imagery was used that he was setting in motion the wheel of the Dharma, the wheel of the Dhamma. And the idea is that that wheel has been rolling steadily ever since and continues to do so. Now, I think primarily the notion of a wheel in motion had to do with a kind of ongoing living tradition, keeping it moving, keeping it active, keeping it alive. And the way that tradition has been kept alive is by people practicing it. You know, the Buddhist teachings are all about how to live in the world, how to encounter things every day, how to gradually train your mind and deepen your wisdom and perfect your behavior in ways that lead to greater well-being and avoid or mitigate the impact of suffering. So it's primarily an image of perpetual motion, if you will, to keep the wheel rolling. But it's also helpful in a couple of other ways. For one thing, if you think about a wheel, it's always touching the ground at one point and one point only. And that point changes all the time as it rolls. And yet the same point comes around again and again on a regular basis to come in contact with the earth. Now that's an apt metaphor for what I'm trying to do here with the Dhamma Wheel project, because it's a way of touching the ground, if you will, touching the teachings a little bit every single day, but a different part of the teaching every day. The wheel is also helpful as an image for the Buddhist notion of mind. The mind is something that's constantly moving and changing. It's a process. And it also is manifesting only once every mind moment as the senses come in contact with the environment. And so every single moment is a different moment, a different encounter between the senses and the objects of those senses. And it's also perhaps a metaphor for the way we live our lives, which is one day at a time. And every day is a new beginning and a new ending. So I think the wheel is, however it was originally intended, is apt metaphor in a lot of different ways. Let me then say a word about Dhamma. Dhamma, of course, is the Pali pronunciation of the word Dharma, which has a lot of meanings, but generally in this sense means the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. The Buddha is the teacher, the one who has become enlightened or awakened. The Dhamma is the teaching or the curriculum that he left behind, the record of his teachings. And then the Sangha is the communities that have come together, both monastic and lay, to help support one another in practicing those teachings. So the teachings are something that were always meant to be integrated into daily life and into practice. There was never a differentiation in Buddhist tradition between theory and practice. Theory and practice were always two sides of the same coin, if you will. And as such, this notion of sort of regular ongoing study, but a kind of study that involves actually doing that, what the teachings say, doing both behaviorally in terms of our ethical life, doing in terms of actually practicing meditation on a regular basis and training the mind and pointing it in certain directions. But primarily the practice of slowly but steadily gaining an understanding of what the Buddha was trying to tell us and the way he was trying to steer us. And so what he left behind in the Dhamma, this body of teaching, is in the modern world a corpus of literary material. There's a lot of texts that are in the Pali language that represent his lifetime of teaching. As you know, originally the tradition was passed on orally in ancient India. Before they wrote things down, everyone memorized things and passed them on. The Vedas, the Upanishads, the Buddhist texts are all practiced orally. But they still were composed during the lifetime of the Buddha and the first couple of generations afterwards. And as such, they preserve a very remarkably complete and coherent and consistent body of teachings. What I'd like to suggest is that the Buddha taught an integrated curriculum. He taught a wide range of things that were all designed to be interrelated to one another, interconnected with one another, and that they are best studied and practiced in a systematic and sequential way. And so that's what I was trying to design here with this Dhamma wheel project. So taking the idea of the Dhamma and the wheel together. This was created a couple of years ago and has run for 2 years now on Tricycle and is beginning now its third year, wherein every single day one reads a different text and then tries to reflect upon it deeply throughout the day, and then find various little ways to put it into practice or to relate those teachings to one's own practical experience. And so the idea of the Dhamma wheel, I'm kind of making use of modern technology since everybody is looking at their phones every day anyway, looking at other things like the news or whatever else. Why not include as part of your repertoire some brief but poignant reflections on what the Buddha was teaching us. And so what I've done is I've gone through the Pali Canon and I've extracted certain key texts, all very brief, none is more than a sentence or two long. But the idea in particular is to structure it in such a way that we can read what's being said in the original words, very close to the Pali original. These are translated directly from the classical texts, and then reflect upon them, in our own words, in our own language, in our own environment, our own world. What does that mean to me? What does that mean today? How can I see the significance of what that particular textual passage is saying in the context of my own lived experience, in the context of my own daily practice? And so the way this is organized, the Dhamma wheel is organized, is around the notion of the Eightfold Path. As I'm sure you all know, one of the core teachings of the Buddha is the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path is incorporated in that. There's a wonderful text in the Middle Length Discourses where the Buddha refers to the Four Noble Truth teaching as something like an elephant's footprint. It's called the Elephant's Footprint Discourse, if you want to look it up. It basically says, just like an elephant's footprint is large enough that the footprint of every other animal will fit within it, so also the Four Noble Truths is a broad enough epitome or description of the Buddha's teaching that all the other teachings will fit within. So the first truth is, that suffering exists, that there's an unsatisfactoriness to our lived experience in the human condition. The second noble truth is that there's a cause to that suffering or that dissatisfaction, the cause being craving or yearning or sort of compelling desire. The third noble truth, that there is a solution to that desire, that illness, if you will, that's caused, that dis-ease caused by the craving, can be brought to an end. If we can learn to undermine the craving, we will undermine the suffering. And then the fourth noble truth is the path leading to that end of suffering. And that path is described as the Eightfold Path. Now, the first three of these truths, the suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessations of suffering, I think is universal to all forms of Buddhism in all ages and is kind of fundamental to the shared tradition. But I think every tradition varies widely on exactly what path is going to take us to that end of suffering. And this is where cultural differences, historical differences, individual differences even, I think can play an important role in understanding how do we get to the end of suffering? How do we practice the teachings that we've been given in these discourses? And I'm sure you also know that Buddhism is renowned, the Buddhist tradition is renowned for its flexibility and its adaptability, that whatever civilization it encounters, whatever historical age it encounters, it finds a way to adapt itself to that setting, but also gradually adapt that culture to understanding things, to understanding what the teachings are themselves. And this is the case in our time as much as ever. And there have been generation after generation of very sincere Buddhists who are trying to walk this Eightfold Path and find a way to manifest this Buddhist wisdom and understanding in their own culture, their own historical moment, if you will. So that's what we're trying to do here with the Dhamma wheel. Now, the Eightfold Path has always been a little perplexing to me for a number of reasons. First of all, it's not a kind of relay of chariots sort of model. In other words, you don't have to master the first aspect of the path before you move on to the second and complete that before you move to the third. It's not progressive in that sense. Certain other teachings in Buddhism are. things like the jhanas, the meditation absorptions. You have to master one before moving to the next and so forth. But that's not the case here. And so what do they mean by eightfold? Atanga is the word, atangaka. It's a word used for branches of a tree, for example, or appendages to the body. So it's like eight-limbed or eight factors and so forth. Sometimes I almost think it needs to be translated as an eight-lane highway, because really you're doing all eight things simultaneously. You're not doing them in sequence. You're trying to move forward on a path, keeping eight different modalities in balance with one another and advancing steadily together. Maybe some a little ahead of others at various times, but you're moving through an entire process. And that process is really laid out in that Eightfold Path. So in trying to adapt this to an ongoing daily practice, the first thing I did was say, okay, we have 7 days of the week and we have an eightfold path. That's pretty close. Maybe we can use the week as a model for how to practice the various elements of the path. And conveniently, the last two elements of the path, right mindfulness and right concentration, are both really simultaneous complementary ways of practicing meditation. And so they really combine well together. And also given the fact that in our culture, Sunday is the last day of the week historically, and that it is also historically a day of sort of contemplation or reflection, that I was able, by combining the last two factors of the path into a single day on Sunday, to line up the other factors with the other days of the week. So we're going to consider throughout the year of practice that every Monday is dedicated to right view. And every Tuesday is going to be right intention. And every Thursday is right speech. And so forth throughout the Eightfold Path. We also have right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and then right mindfulness and concentration on Sunday. So one of the ideas is to sort of make this correlation, connect in one's habit and experience and behavior, the fact that certain days of the week are due to focus on certain aspects of the teaching that the Buddha left behind. Now, the next part of this is that in every given month, there are at least 4 weeks. Now, of course, after that, some days have more than others, but we have at least 28 days every single month. So every month is going to have 4 Mondays, 4 Tuesdays, 4 Wednesdays, and so forth. So we break down the path factors further to a fourfold model. And this works, for example, right view, the first day of the week, Monday. Every Monday is right view. But this is classically understood as understanding the Four Noble Truths. So we have 4 truths. So the first Monday of every month is going to be some passage and some practice dealing with understanding what is suffering, how the Buddha is using this term, and how do we experience in our own lives. The second Monday of every month is going to be on the second noble truth, the cause of suffering, the origin of suffering. The third Monday on the cessation of suffering, and then the fourth Monday on the path leading to cessation of suffering. So the idea is that I've gone through the Pali Canon and I've selected passages that deal specifically with those themes. So that means in the first month, there will be 4 passages, one for each of the days, which deals with suffering, and in particular, some particular aspect of suffering, its origination, its cessation, or the path. The second factor of the path, right intention or right thought, is going to be on every Tuesday. And there I've adapted, there's different ways to construe right thought or right intention, but one of them has a lot to do with what we know as the four Brahma Viharas. Right intention means, how are you setting your mind? What is the attitude? What is the intention? What is the aspiration that you're organizing your mind around in that moment? And so I thought the four Brahma Viharas would work well for this and adapt well to the fourfold structure. So every Tuesday, we focus, the first Tuesday of every month, we're looking at metta, at loving kindness. And we extract some text from the canon that deals specifically with loving kindness. And then we spend that whole day reflecting upon that and seeing if we can put it into action in our own lives in certain ways. And the second Tuesday of every month, of course, it's compassion. The third is appreciative joy, and the fourth is equanimity. So on a consistent basis, at least 12 times throughout the yearly program, you're going to be dealing with metta in a particular way, 12 different ways. You're going to be dealing with the compassion in 12 different ways, and so forth. Wednesday is given over to the next factor, right speech. And there, traditionally, there are four kinds of, right speech: to speak truthfully, to speak, to avoid untruth speech, the way they put it, to avoid abusive speech, to avoid hurtful speech, and to avoid frivolous speech. So again, on the first, second, third, and fourth Wednesday of each week, we're going to be looking at passages on speech. And my hope is that over time, Wednesday will become right speech day for a lot of people. And then maybe there'll be a sort of a habit among certain community members to give particular attention to particular kinds of teaching on each day of the week. Thursday is right action. And here, actually, it might be easier if Carolyn, if you could put up the chart so that people can see this visually, because it can sound a little complex if I just talk about it. But there's a chart or a table of this that's actually on the website at Tricycle. And I think we may be able to call it up now to use as a helpful tool. There we go. Okay, so here we see the first week of every Monday is the truth of suffering, the second week, the origin of suffering, and so forth. When we get into Wednesday, we're going to work the first week abstaining from false speech, then the second week abstaining from malicious speech, from harsh speech, and from gossip or frivolous speech. Now, in action, right action, traditionally in Buddhism, there's three kinds of action: the action of body, speech, and mind. And they talk about each one as a different form of behavior. And we're used to thinking of bodily behavior, and this is the day when we focus on that. We want to be very careful not to do harm to other people by our negligence or by intentional bodily actions of some sort. But also speech we're familiar with as a kind of action. On those days, we're going to be especially attentive to the impact of our speech on others and try to do no harm. But even mental action, even what you do in the quiet of your own home, in the quiet of your own mind, even if you're outwardly not doing or saying anything, every moment is a mental action. We're thinking thoughts, we're having intentions, we're experiencing certain emotions. And these days, we turn our attention more subtly inward to see that our mental action is as harmless and as fruitful as possible. And so here I've taken a liberty, and I hope the Dharma forgives me for this, but I had to make some adaptations. And so I'm inventing a new category here just to fit the fourfold structure, and including a section on social action. Now, for the most part, Buddhism did not advocate social action in the way that we do nowadays with engaged Buddhism and using Buddhist principles to help affect social change and so forth. But I've taken the liberty to create this category just for the sake of our program. I'm not trying to reinvent the Dharma here. But given our interest in this these days, I'm extrapolating those passages in the text that really talk about how we impact one another through our behaviors, that specify the kind of interpersonal relationships that go on in daily life. And so for the fourth Thursday of every month, we'll be able to look particularly at social action and how we maybe can bring about change in the world and as carefully and as Buddhist influenced as possible. And a similar adaptation for Fridays, in the Noble Eightfold Path, is right livelihood. And there's a lot of focus there on, abstaining from professions that cause harm, like making weapons or poisons or trading in human misery of some sort. And I'm more broadly interpreting it as right living rather than right livelihood per se. And here I'm taking an opportunity to look at the precepts in a systematic way. As you know, there are 5 precepts, but one of those precepts has to do with right speech. That's been covered on Wednesday. So we're dedicating Thursdays to a systematic look at the other 4 precepts. So on the first Friday of the month, we'll be looking at passages that have to do with abstaining from harming living beings, sort of non-killing and non-harming of various kinds, and how to construe that and work with it as a living teaching. On the second Friday, it'll be abstaining from taking what is not given. And we're going to look much more closely at one of those in a moment. In week 3, abstaining from misbehaving amongst sensual pleasures. This is traditionally understood as about a precept around sexuality, and we'll look at whatever teachings there are in the text about sexuality. But we're also going to expand the meaning of that, as I think is appropriate, because the Pali doesn't talk about sexuality per se. It says misbehaving among all sensual pleasures. And I think that, especially in our contemporary age, there are other places we can look at how carefully we are behaving or misbehaving in the context of experiencing pleasures. And then the fourth week will be abstaining from intoxication that leads to heedlessness. And so there's a lot to be said in the text about that, which we'll look at. Now, Saturdays are given over to right effort. And as some of you know, in the classical tradition, there are 4 right efforts. They're defined in 4 very specific ways. So that fits very naturally into this structure, into this context. So the language can be a little confusing, but it boils down to there can be healthy or unhealthy thoughts in the mind. That is, ones that lead away from suffering and towards greater understanding. Those are healthy. And those thoughts and emotions which create more suffering or lead away from clear understanding are considered unhealthy. I'm using the translation healthy and unhealthy. This is kusala and akusala that we're talking about. Some people call it wholesome and unwholesome. There are other translations. Now, the thing is about these helpful and unhelpful is another way of looking at it. The thing about these healthy and unhealthy thoughts and emotions is they can be arisen. That means they're active, they're current, they're in the mind right now and driving what I'm doing and thinking and so forth. Or they can be latent. They could be potential. They could be what we call in the unconscious mind, not manifest yet, but capable of manifesting. And so the Buddhists use arisen healthy states and unarisen healthy states, arisen unhealthy states and unarisen unhealthy states. And again, the language is a little confusing to us, but one of the great things about this kind of structure is that once you get the hang of it, you become familiar, you become accustomed to the language they use, to the way the teachings are put forward. And it becomes easier and easier, more and more apparent how to work best with these. And then on Sundays, as I said, is a day of meditation, a day of practice. I mean, we're practicing all the time, but in particular, we put aside extra time on Sunday. And this is the time to look at mindfulness. And what do you know? There are 4 foundations of mindfulness, or 4 ways of establishing mindfulness. So we'll be looking the first week at mindfulness of the body, and the second week at mindfulness of feeling, the third week of mindfulness of mental states, and then the fourth one of mindfulness of the contents of mental phenomena. There are also, as you know, 4 jhanas, or 4 levels of meditative absorption. There's a little difficulty with this, though, on 2 fronts for our purposes. First of all, there's not a lot of textual material in the Pali Canon about the 4 jhanas, that they are primarily formulaic, and we really just get the same formula over and over. There are a few things said about them, and I pull out what I can. But for the most part, I just repeat the standard formula each Sunday as a kind of addendum to the discussion of right mindfulness. The other problem with the jhanas is they really are deep experiential practices. And this kind of more superficial study that we're doing is not amenable to really going deeply into them. To really say anything meaningful about the jhanas, you have to practice them with an experienced teacher over a significant amount of time. You're not going to be going deeply into the jhanas, every other Sunday, for example. So primarily the teachings on Sunday are about mindfulness, but with a little bit about concentration. But this isn't a meditation course. It doesn't have deep instruction, but it is useful, I think, to all meditators to become very familiar with what the texts themselves say about meditative states and how to practice them. So that's the idea. It sounds like a complex structure, but really, once you get the hang of it, it becomes familiar. It becomes more luminous, I think. And so each day, what you're going to get in the email, if you participate in the program, are really 4 paragraphs, okay? The first one is going to be a quotation from the texts that is generic to that month and that theme. So there's certain texts that are going to be repeating 12 times throughout the year, because that's the general orientation of that particular theme, that day of the week, that path factor, and so forth. And so at first it might seem redundant. Well, I already read that, but the idea is to read the same thing once a month for the whole 12 months to become familiar with that. The second textual passage, the second paragraph, will be a textual passage that is unique to that day. There's 365 of them, no 2 the same. And that's going to be a more specific passage from the text, which is linked to the theme of the first passage. The third paragraph is labeled reflection. And this is just my saying a few words about, what that means and how to use it and how it relates to other practices and things like that. Sort of some commentary, if you will. So you're not working entirely with the raw text, but also with some interpretive commentary that I'm supplying. And then the fourth paragraph, or the fourth component of it, is called practice. And there I'm making specific suggestions, for example, of how you might put it into practice, or encouraging you to work with it in a more experiential way and not just as a theoretical idea. So I want to walk you through one of these so you get the idea of how it goes and how to work with it. And then I'll stop and take questions and comments from you, which I'm happy to do. So I thought that, in order to work through a specific one, let's just pick the one randomly that happened to go out today. So today is a Friday, and I believe, Carolyn, that you can put this on screen as well.
Yes, just one moment. Sorry about that,
Okay.
Andrew. Let me share my screen here.
As a Friday, we're going to be talking about right living, right livelihood traditionally, but we're calling it right living.
Okay, let's see. Here we are. Right living. Can everyone
Okay.
see this?
Yes. And there should be two more paragraphs. Can you scroll down? There's
Yes.
the second
Let me
page.
see if I can get them both to appear on the screen.
We don't need it yet,
I
so
have
take
it.
your time.
I have it over here.
Okay, there you go.
Let me make this a little smaller so we can.
All right, so this is what you're going to get in your inbox if you're part of the program. Um, the first paragraph, so first of all, right living on the top line there is the theme for the day. And that, of course, repeats every week throughout the entire year. And then the title of that one, undertaking the commitment to abstain from taking what is not given. That's the way the matter is put in the classical text. So the first passage, the first paragraph is an extract from the Pali Canon on this particular theme. And in this case, you notice that I've taken three very short ones and put them together because they're all related to one another and they all inform well enough. And if you do this for the whole year, you will see this same paragraph, the same first paragraph, 12 different times because it will highlight the same theme once each month. Okay, you with me? The references here, MN and AN, these are all taken from the four primary Nikayas, the four primary collections of discourses. And the references for this is given in the program. You can see them. I draw largely on Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations from the Wisdom publications, the long discourses of the Buddha by Maurice Walsh, the middle length discourses by Nyanamoli and Bodhi, the connected discourses of the Buddha, and the numerical discourses of the Buddha, both by Bhikkhu Bodhi. In some cases, I modify the translations a little bit, but for the most part, I follow the classical ones, so they're familiar. There's one place where I draw from the Visuddhimagga, a later commentarial text, because it has some interesting information about the Brahma Viharas. But for the most part, it's the four Nikayas. So this first passage, taking what is not given is unhealthy, refraining from taking what is not given is healthy. So that's putting it very clearly. It's good for you to not steal things, and it's not good for you to steal things. The next passage from a slightly different sutta in the same collection, abandoning the taking of what is not given, one abstains from taking what is not given. One does not take by way of theft the wealth and properties of others. So here's one of the places in the Pali text where they specify and define what they mean by taking what is not giving. And they're doing it in terms of basically theft, using this word thefts. But as we'll see, it has a wider meaning than that. And then the last one, which I repeat each month for this theme, one practices thus: others may take what is not given, but I will refrain from taking what is not given. And this language is used for some of the other precepts as well. And the idea is simply this, that ethical behavior in Buddhism is not about trying to get other people to behave correctly. I know that's a lot of what Western ethics is about. How do I get people to do what they should, and so forth? But Buddhism, I think, recognizes the futility of trying or expecting other people to change. And the emphasis is really on oneself. It's, we're trying to be a good person because it's a healthy and helpful and appropriate and wholesome thing to do, not because other people want it or expect it of us. And we're not trying to transform other people directly, but only indirectly. If we model what it's like to take care around these ethical principles, people will get inspired by that. They'll respond in similar manners. So it's more of a gentle influence than a direct influence. So we're going to repeat that once a month, and so you'll become familiar with it, and it'll just remind you of it. So nothing is totally different each time. But then the second passage is only stated once throughout the year. This is the unique passage for this day. There is a gift, which is a great gift, pristine, of long standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated, that will never be suspect. Here a noble person gives up taking what is not given and refrains from it. In doing so, one gives freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression to an immeasurable number of beings. This is from the Anguttara Nikaya, or the numerical collection. And the language is a little clumsy to us. Again, it's a direct translation of the Pali original. So there are conventions of the Pali literature, which takes some getting used to. The kind of repetition of the words, listing a number of synonyms together, for example, here, is one of those conventions. And again, what can seem clumsy and uncomfortable at first will actually become familiar and even welcome as you are more exposed to it. But this passage is really introducing a very important dimension to the whole concept of ethical behavior. And that is, it's a gift that you give people. Your moral behavior is a gift of harmlessness, as they put it, that you give to someone else. And so in this case, if you become a person who is very careful around the issue of not taking what has not been freely offered, then you are actually, the gift that you're giving people is that they can feel safe. Somebody can leave their door unlocked and feel safe that you're at least not going to come in and take something from that locked room. They can drop their wallet on a street and feel safe, because if somebody finds it, they'll return it to you, you know? So it's not just trying to maintain your own integrity, but ethical behavior in Buddhist understanding is a way of giving a gift to all the other people in your community, all the people you care about. Now, you know, we can't be naive and just say, well, everybody's going to behave like that, so nobody has to lock anything. That's not going to happen. But again, the Buddhist idea is, if I can start modeling this in my own life, in my own self, and then gradually build it out, it'll have a ripple effect and transform others. So that's a general passage taken from the text and a specific passage. And the idea is that, you know, you'll get up in the morning, you'll look into your phone, and along with everything else, all the news and whatever else, you're going to read this or something like it. And it'll just give you something to reflect upon. And maybe throughout the day, you'll reread it from time to time. Maybe some days you'll think about it obsessively. Other days you'll forget all about it. That's okay. It's just there in the background to offer a scaffolding upon which you can orient and organize your practice and your study and your deeper understanding of the tradition. Now, the other thing you'll get with this is not just the raw text, but this reflection. And this is talking a little bit about it and saying some of the things that perhaps I just said. This is the precept against theft, which you will notice is broadly stated to include a wide range of behaviors we might not consider stealing. In other words, the precept doesn't say you abstain from stealing, you know, material wealth. That's part of what it says, but it means it more broadly. There are other ways that we can construe theft. There are many subtle ways we may take what is not freely offered, including exploiting the labor of others who may be unfairly remunerated. We might also take from others non-material things, such as time, ideas, credit, power, and freedom. Be careful not to do this. So this reflection is simply directing you towards this broader question and say, well, what exactly does it mean for something to be freely given, freely offered? You know, if you have a specialized craft, let's say you're a violin maker, you spend all this time carefully making this violin, and you wind up, you know, selling it to someone who's a great violinist, and you know they're going to appreciate it and cherish it. That's your labor being freely given and remunerated, no doubt. And that seems like a very healthy situation. But what if somebody who's helped supply the product that you're using or buying is in an uncomfortable situation, maybe an involuntary situation. Maybe they're working because they have to in bad conditions, and you know, and so forth and so on. Is that really a freely offered thing, or is it coerced in some way? So let's just look at this a little more carefully in our everyday lives. You know, let's try to encourage ways for people to feel that you're freely offering things to them with goodwill and generosity, and they can feel that from you as well. So just an example of some suggestions for daily practice: making a commitment to act with integrity regarding the property of others, and other weeks it'll be regarding speech or livelihood and so forth, is another way of giving the gift of harmlessness to all beings. Practice being more attentive to when something is freely offered and when it is not. Finders keepers does not apply to Buddhist ethics. Even when the Buddha, when he first left the palace and went forth into the wilderness, and he became a wandering ascetic, and he took off his jewelry and his fine clothing, and he tied it all up and put it up on a tree. And it's not enough to just leave it there. He formally uttered these words. He said, "I hereby declare that whoever finds this, it is freely given to them." That's how much care they took around this notion of things being freely given. And thereby, if somebody came across it and took those valuable things, they wouldn't be considered thieves, that it was given to them. Anyway, and so it's just ways that we can think about it otherwise. Think how grateful you are when someone returns something you left behind. Oh, I found your sweater, you dropped your wallet, whatever. It feels good when somebody gives that back to you, right? So take up the habit of paying it forward, preferring to give rather than take. And again, the guidance here is towards how do we develop that perspective on things, that way of life, that we actually take more joy in giving things to others, not necessarily material things, but giving time and favors and attention and care. And we feel good every time we have the opportunity to give, rather than when we get lucky and are able to take stuff. So that's just one example picked almost randomly because it happened to be the one that came out today, on how this system is organized, how to use it in a practical way. And my hope here really is that there would be, from the beginning, my hope would be that there would be a gradually expanding group of people who are participating in this in some way. And so maybe, colleagues at work will collectively focus on, Wednesday is Right Speech Day. Let's be careful how we talk to one another. Or maybe there's some practice community that meets on Sundays and does some meditation and be guided by that particular teaching on mindfulness, and so forth. So just generally putting out a very quiet background system whereby those who are interested can tap into that and draw from it in any number of ways that I can't even foresee, to help guide and strengthen and support both their study of the classical tradition from the horse's mouth, so to speak, but also the practice of how to put this into our own lives, into our own experience, and how it will contribute to our own growth of understanding. So that's the idea, that's the project, and I'm happy we've got 10 minutes left to take any questions or comments or reflections that any of you have about all that I've said. And Carolyn, I take it I can rely upon you to either read the chat or call on hands or something.
Thanks so much, Andrew, for taking us through that practice. So we're going to go to some of the questions in the chat box right now. Let's see. First one, could you tell us the source text so that anyone can read the context for each passage?
Yes, every single passage that's in here has a reference of exactly where it comes from. Now, the reference is in the Pali rather than the English, but the English translations all have both frames of reference. So everything here can be looked up in the English translation. On the support page for the Dhamma Wheel, I list the specific editions, the authors, the APA citation for each one. So I would encourage that. I encourage you to keep these volumes on the side. And when you come across a passage in the Dhamma Wheel that you go back to the original and read the context and the larger issue and so forth. That's another way in which this can help support your practice by directing you to specific places.
Wonderful, thank you. And Helena is asking specifically with regards to the passage that we just reviewed. She says, what about buying or not buying items that are known for being made by use of child labor? Of course, it seems best to reject such items, but at the same time, these kids who are often supporting their families might lose their job. What do you do in a kind of an ethical situation like this?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. And as I understand Buddhist ethics, they're not giving you specific answers to those questions. They're really encouraging each of us to find our own way with them. That, it's putting out certain principles of harm being done versus trying to stop harm from being done, but it doesn't have a particular subscription of, in the many, many, many complex cases in the real world, this is just one of them. But I think that a person would gradually get more sensitized to the issues at hand, but gradually get more educated about what the specific conditions are, and maybe be able to judge for themselves. In one situation, it's going to be more helpful to buy that product to support those people. In another situation, it might be more effective to boycott that product because that's going to be more helpful. And other times you may actually get more engaged in an active solution. At other times, there's no set rule, in other words. What we're learning in Buddhist ethics is certain guiding principles about doing harm and not doing harm, about what's healthy and unhealthy, both for oneself and for others. And then it's left to our evolving understanding and wisdom to figure out how to put those into practice in very specific circumstances. One of the key points of the Buddhist teaching is that no two moments are ever the same. Every single moment that occurs is absolutely unique. And so we have both the opportunity and the responsibility to respond to each moment based on our best understanding and our best moral development.
And a question about the actual symbol of the Dharma wheel. We have someone who's asking why the spokes of the wheel extend beyond the who, if there is a specific answer to that question.
I had the same question. I just put together all of this in a sort of single volume, and I looked on the clip art to get a wheel symbol. And I noticed that on almost all of them, they've got little knobs on the end. I said, wait a minute, that's not a wheel that's going to roll. That's like the steering wheel on a yacht or something like that. So I deliberately searched through and found an image that didn't have the little knobs on it. So the short answer is I have no idea why that's the case. It seems to me that that would inhibit the rolling of the wheel. But it's out there, and so what can I say?
We'll leave it a mystery for now. A question about the course. Does one need a certain level of proficiency and knowledge of Buddhism to participate, or is this a beginner appropriate course?
No, it's really for anyone at all levels. I think people with a lot of practice and knowledge will benefit from it because it goes more systematically through the teachings they're already familiar with. But if you're brand new to it, it could be an excellent introduction. You don't have to know everything about everything. If it can be enough to just hear a single phrase, start thinking about it in a certain way, and start reflecting about how it can make a change and how you face that day. You don't need to know about it, in other words, to be able to use it in specifically helpful ways.
And another question, kind of looking specifically at the theme of non-stealing, and this may be another case of, it's case by case and different for everyone and more subjective. But Jacqueline is asking, is it okay for the Dharma and mindfulness to be taken very boldly into the marketplace and to be sold for many millions of dollars? What is your lens on that sort of issue?
I think that's a sign of our times. I think there's nothing inherent in Buddhism or the mindfulness practices or traditions that are inclined towards commercialization. And yet American culture or global civilization at the moment is organized around that economic model. And so anything and everything that anybody comes across, people will find a way to monetize it and, if possible, make millions of dollars off it. I think that's what's happening with mindfulness today. I mean, there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are seeing it as a way to make money, and there's a lot of money being made. I think there's nothing inherent in the product itself that is particularly amenable to that. And I think that everyone, again, has to work with it in different ways. I think that, at least in the early days, I mean, I've been on the Buddhist scene for some time in America. Many of us tried very hard to not make any money off it and do everything by dana and do everything freely offered and so forth. But the inexorable forces of our culture have gradually swelled in such a way that it's hard to do that with anything. A lot of times when you give something away freely, it's not considered valuable by the recipient. So I don't know the answer to that. I guess in this particular case, I wish this program was free. But between Tricycle and myself and others, we tried to keep it as modest as possible. So it's an ongoing charge. You can stop anytime. And we're trying to find a balance, let's put it that way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think the rest of the questions look like they're specific questions about the course that look like they've been answered by our support team. Let's see, one comment that just came in. The wheel extending out is closer to Dan Siegel's wheel of awareness, to me at least, that perception goes on to infinity. So just an interesting comment and parallel.
Yes, other people have adapted the model in various ways as well. And Dan Siegel's one of them. Yeah, it's a useful model.
Great. Well, I think in that case, we only have a couple minutes left. And since we've addressed all of the questions, any final comments?
Yeah, on my side, I would just say, my whole career, I've been interested in the integration of study and practice, and the integration of study and practice further integrated into living a modern life as a modern person. This course is one of my many attempts to try to bring those things together. I'm really thankful to Tricycle to have the outreach to reach so many of you. And I'm motivated by really strengthening the traditional understandings of what the Buddha said. There are a lot of brilliant teachers and a lot of new interpretations and a lot of great new ways of applying what he said. But I'm a bit of a curmudgeon in thinking that the Buddha said things pretty well himself. And he said them very succinctly and very carefully. And I think the closer we look at those actual words and work with the nuances in those words, we'll discover areas of practice and growth and understanding that just aren't accessible in the modern cultural vernacular. So that's
Wonderful.
why I would encourage you directly reading these texts. If not through this program, then, just get one of the texts yourself and read it on your nightstand. It'd be beneficial.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, again, for bringing all of your wisdom and for teaching us about the course. It's really such an incredible offering. I really encourage everyone to go ahead and give it a try if they're interested. Like Andrew said, you can cancel at any time. So you can always try it for a couple months and see how you like it. So thank you so much, Andrew. Again, we are offering this workshop for free. If you'd like to make a donation, it's tricycle.org/donate. And we will send out the replay link both in the chat box and also in a follow-up email. And again, if you would like to sign up for Dhamma Wheel, it's learn.tricycle.org/Dhamma-wheel. And the code for 1 month free is Eightfold Path with the number 8. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate having
Let me
you.
just add one more teaser very quickly. I'm
Please.
actually working on a second version of this called Dharma Wheel, where I draw every day from the Mahayana Sutras, not from the early texts. So I haven't talked to Tricycle about this yet, so they don't know this, but I am working on a follow-up on all this for those of you who are more familiar and more interested in the Mahayana tradition.
Wonderful. Well, something to look forward to. And again, I'm just seeing something that came in the chat. Another question about the discount code. It is Eightfold Path with the number 8. So, and all of this information we will follow up with in an email. Thanks so much, everyone, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.